Thank you very much for your thoughts on how to addressing NTBs in a random context. And we'll now hear from His Excellency Pan Sorasak, Secretary of State, Ministry of Commerce in Cambodia, who has kindly agreed to share your knowledge with us on NTMs from a policy perspective. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished speakers, good afternoon to you all. Selamat siang and bon après-midi. First of all, I would like to thank ITC to invite me here, and I'm really pleased to share with you all the informations on non-tariff measures, the Cambodia perspective. As you may know that the non-tariff measures are recognized as the legitimate policies instruments that government may use to protect human health, safety, and animal and plant health, to protect national treasures of artistic, historic, and archaeological values, and also to help conserve exhaustible natural resources and other policies objectives that are laid out in GATT, Article 20 and Article 21 on general exceptions and securities exceptions. This measure will necessarily increase the cost of engaging in trade and or trade to be restrictive. It is an important principles of the WTO agreements on SPS and TBT is that measure in this area should be no more trade restrictive than is necessary to obtain their policies objective. They must not become instruments for protecting a country's domestic markets. Let me bring you to Cambodia's perspective. Cambodia is an LDC with an emerging international competitiveness in agricultural products, fish and fisheries products, and seafood. It has also the potential to export processed food. In order to export successfully in this area, Cambodia will need to satisfy the non-tariff measures imposed by important countries, primarily their food safety requirements. Cambodia faces the following challenges. First one is insufficient development of SPS and TBT systems. Cambodia is at the very early stages of putting in place functioning SPS and TBT regimes, and the product's coverage of those regimes is still incomplete. For example, we are at the very beginning of putting in place SPS measure on fish and have just completed standard for rice. This incomplete product coverage means that for many products, potential exporters receive no support from our regimes. Second is transparency. It is often difficult for Cambodia's exporters to ascertain that exactly the SPS requirements are in given export market. We have had the experience of having shipments turned away at their point of entry because of requirements that were unknown to the exporters had not been met. To be sure, SPS inquiry point requests of WTO's members are a good help. In ASEAN, the inventory of NTMs that is being prepared will also help as well. But the cost of securing the necessary informations are often high, and the informations may be incomplete. Third is the cost. Meeting an importing country's SPS requirement can be very costly. One large importing country, for example, requires that certain fruits grown in Cambodia to be irrigated before shipment. For Cambodia, it is prohibitively expensive. There must be less expensive ways to ensure that the fruit poses no threats to human health. The SPS requirement of the EU countries on fish and fish products are not a well-known example of a complex and costly requirements. I'd like to mention a way forward, what we need to do. Cambodia is moving forwards on 2 fronts. First, we are receiving donors' assistance to put in place SPS and TBT regimes, and will require further such assistance. This includes the drafting of necessary regulations and norms, a lot of trainings, and help with laboratories. This is an expensive and time-consuming task. Second, we will be seeking targeted assistance in meeting in specific requirements of specific products to specific countries. Recently, for example, China responded positively to our request for assistance in putting in place the SPS procedures that China requires for its rice exports. The result has been opening of a market that was previously closed to us for SPS reasons. And we hope that to generate other targeted assistance of this sort in the near future. Let me mention also on the mechanisms that we have since years 2000. It's called Government-Private Sector Forums. In there, we have a meetings face-to-face from the private sector's leaders with their prime ministers and his ministers. It's called Council Ministers, every 6 months. There, we discuss all the issues that impede on the trade facilitations. Below that, we have what we call working groups on each sectors. And that mechanisms, each sector means that if you are in tourism, you work, the private sectors work with the ministers of tourism. And if you are in agriculture, you work, private sectors work with the ministers of agriculture. And these working groups, we have 9. And they've been meeting regularly every 3 to 4 weeks per month, or maybe 1 month time. And this allows us to resolve a lot of issues on trade facilitations. And if that cannot be done, we can bring up to what I mentioned to you earlier, is the government-private sector forums chaired by the prime ministers. According to IFSC's World Bank, we save about $200 million since year 2000 because of this. Let me bring you briefly on the ASEAN front. As you know, that Cambodia is part of ASEAN, is member of ASEAN. We are the newest member. We joined ASEAN in 1996. Right now, Cambodia is chairing, Cambodia is the chairman of ASEAN. How ASEAN works? The ASEAN Action for Foster Private Sector's Assistance to Eliminate Intra-ASEAN Trade Barrier. The AFTA, the ASEAN Free Trade Agreement Council, and the ASEAN Economic Ministers have given priorities to the eliminations of NTBs and NTMs, with the NTBs components after the elimination of import tariffs. The report of the AEC, ASEAN Economic Communities, to the 20th ASEAN Summit mentioned that despite the achievements in liberalizing tariff under the ASEAN Free Trade Agreement, NTMs continue to impede the free flow of goods in the region. So in order to address the restrictive elements in these measures and look into the possibilities of eliminating them, priority should be given to the development of the roadmaps. We mentioned about the roadmaps. The roadmap includes practical and effective measures to identify and report NTBs, including from the private sectors as foreseen in Article 42 of ATIGA. This is the ASEAN Trade in Goods Agreements. 2, examine NTBs reports according to agreed guideline, provided detail on how to define and assess impact on possible NTBs. Third, decide the elimination of NTBs. Fourth is report publicly on the decisions taken and their justifications. Moderators, I stop right here, and then I open for later on the Q&As if you like. Thank you.